The thing about World War One that made us all interested is that it's basically how the Australian legend was born. I never actually knew Michael Curran as a person, but from studying his history, where he went and what he did at war, to actually go and see his grave in Europe was really quite overwhelming. I never anticipated the effect that it would have on me until I was actually standing there, looking straight at his grave. The ANZAC tour at Mackay North State High School is one that is well known within the community. 13 years ago, a history class asked their teacher, "So why can't we go on an excursion?" But where was a history class meant to go? I think that the best way to learn about something is to experience it. At the time, the initial idea was to go see Saving Private Ryan. But then the history teacher said, "Well, if we're going to go on an excursion, where would you like to go?" This is when the class came up with the idea of Gallipoli on Anzac Day. This was the beginning of ANZAC Tour 13 years ago. The interesting thing about it all was that students on the first trip started thinking, well, we've got all these relatives who are buried over there. Some of them knew about their relatives and really wanted to find their graves. It was from this that the idea of going out and finding the graves of other people, local people, was born.
So tell me about your trip and the soldier you commemorated.
Well, 13 years later, I finally had the honour of being invited on the 5th trip, the ANZAC 2010 commemorative tour. The soldier that I commemorated was my great-great-uncle. With little information to begin with, the only thing our family knew was that he had a wife, and the information about his military history. We were able to use the War Graves Commission site to find Red Cross files and letters that he had sent back home to his family. Nobody in my family had actually gone over to France before, so I was sort of going to be the first one. I wanted to go and stand exactly where he stood and look over at the same things that he did. I think for me, that was personally quite an emotional experience.
So how did you go about commemorating the soldiers for the families, and did it feel like it was something you had to do?
In just about all cases, we'd been able to find the location of ancestors of people who had asked us to find their relative. We would be able to give the families who had never seen the graves before some sort of closure. Being able to stand in front of a grave or in front of a memorial and to commemorate them and to take a photograph, and then they can have something on their mantelpiece to say, well, there we have a photo of him alive, but there's something very special in a photograph of his grave or his name. I worked quite a lot over year 10 and 11 to pay for the trip, and the only reason I was doing it was because I wanted to. No one pushed me into it. And I think it's because it's something that I wanted to do so badly that I was putting everything in, and I take on the extra hours. I believe if you want something so bad, you'll go and get it. When the day came, we were up at every hour looking at the clock. Is it 5 o'clock yet? We had over 100 graves to find in just 3 weeks. It was going to be unbelievable. It was weird to think that in 48 hours' time we were going to be in Gallipoli, standing at Lone Pine, the Neck, and Anzac Cove. Finally, that's all we could say. Finally, we're going.
So tell me what it was like to be at Gallipoli for the first time.
As we stood on the ferry going across to the Dardanelles, I think that is when it finally started to sink in, because we could all actually see the things that were from history class. As we drove down the hill towards Gallipoli, there was a bit of laughter and a bit of, I suppose, nervous anticipation from everyone. As we drove towards the beach, we all got a little quieter, but we were still talking a lot. We got off the bus and walked down to the beach, and I can tell you, for the next 45 minutes, there was hardly a word spoken. It was a fairly emotional experience to stand in those types of places, because we knew what had happened there, and you knew that the ground that we were standing on was so blood-stained. These soldiers came here. You could actually see where they landed. You could see where they tried to run, but knowing that survival was almost impossible. All the soldiers who have died have just been so young. It's so sad. You look, they're 19, 20, 21, really not many over at 40 at all. They were robbed of their lives so young. Standing where they stood and looking out at the landmarks that they'd seen and the ground that they stood on, it really gave a connection. Really made you feel, it was just like I don't know, it chills you to the bone almost, just to think about it. Yeah.
So, how did it feel to walk in the trenches and walk where they had walked?
As we were walking through the trenches, I immediately started thinking, these men lived here. Not only fought here, but they also lived here. They slept here, they ate here, and they died here. And yet, walking through there, it was so peaceful, a complete contrast to what it would have been so many years ago. We commemorated each soldier by finding their grave, reading a eulogy followed by saying the ode. Throughout all the ceremonies, I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. Throughout the last post and all the other ceremonies, the prayers, the odes, I really appreciated what they'd done for us. Gallipoli definitely lived up to my expectations. It's just the feeling, it's the atmosphere you can feel. It's ANZAC written everywhere.
Wow, Gallipoli sounds amazing. Were you sad that you were leaving?
Well, when we left Turkey, there was such a good feeling about what we had done, that had we left and gone home then, we would have had a great trip. But we still had France to go. I was really looking forward to seeing the battlefields of Europe, seeing where all the men had fought, and meeting the French people who still understood their cause. It does get very overwhelming. You do get very emotional at times. But I guess that's expected. We all knew there was going to be some stage where we would get emotional, but I think we just got more emotional than we thought we would.
So, did you cry?
Yeah, I did, as I was reciting my eulogy.
Now tell me about the day of your relative's commemoration. What was it like? What did you feel?
On the day we found my relative's grave, before we even got into the cemetery, I was just so upset. I really didn't think I'd be so troubled. I didn't realize how much, through all the research and all the artifacts, how much my relative had begun to mean to me. So it really was incredible to stand there in front of his grave. These weren't just names on graves anymore. These were actual people. They were people who lived, people who had feelings just like us, people who thought, had lives, had plans for life, and it's just an unbearable experience. This was the last chapter in the trip. We started to head to the British cemetery, where I commemorated my great-great-uncle, Michael Curran. This was a commemoration I was so nervous about. He is my own relative, my DNA, a man who could have looked like me, or acted like me. A man who has the same genetics, or the same blood type. I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know what else to do, except let the tears run down my face.
So it's been 2 years on. Do you still feel a strong connection to the trip and the people you went there with?
I think that going over there was a defining moment and marked that passage between childhood and adulthood. And I think that's one of the things that, when I look back, I take most out of. I think there's no doubt I have a greater appreciation of not just commemoration, but more respect for life, I think, and what people within life have done for me. I think when I reflect on high school, I look back on this trip as possibly being the catalyst or the start of something big. It's hard to believe it actually has been 2 years. It is, and it will always be, a bond between all the people on the trip, something that we shared, and those memories are something that we will have for the rest of our lives. It's good to see that the tradition continues. It makes me very proud that something that I helped to grow is still continuing. It's something that I will carry with me for my whole life and pass down the message to the generations that we have not forgotten about the past. Even if it was terrible, we won't forget and we will never forget. Modern history class most definitely had more of an impact on me than any other class at school, and I would like to go back. I would like to go back and see Gallipoli again, see the battlefields on the Western Front again, and it would be interesting to see how my emotions would change, going back a second time. I think that it's impossible to go on this trip and not have my world turned upside down. I defy anyone to go on this trip and not come back a changed person. It's not really a tour, it's more of a pilgrimage, something that everyone should do. I can't explain the tour anymore. I just can't think of the right words to say that will even come close to how I feel. The tour was something amazing, and I'm so glad I did it. It has set me up with a lot of motivation to achieve goals. I'm going to make a family tree. I'm going to remember the soldiers from overseas and research new soldiers. I will forever be grateful to the teachers, and I now think of them as friends. I'll always have a bond with everyone, even if we don't have much contact. I will always remember the amazing people I have met. The ANZAC tour has changed my life for the better and has given me so much. Thank you.